It's kind of crazy to start a new church. But when Victoria and I were getting ready to move here to Utah from the Denver area, when we were just learning about Utah and the culture, one of the things that we found over and over and over, and we just kept seeing, is that people here in Utah are trying to measure up to a standard. Or maybe there's, someone who is, has kind of said, I'm done with that standard. I'm giving up trying to meet it. It doesn't matter to me. But what they're finding is they're still measured by that standard. Other people are still holding them up against that standard. And so we just wanted to start Neighborhood Church, a Christian church here in Utah, to say, Jesus offers a better way. And the way that Jesus offers isn't about a list of check boxes of things that you must do and things that you must avoid. But the better way that Jesus offers is a relationship with him. And Jesus is God, so he offers a relationship with the living God. And so we're starting Neighborhood Church. And a little bit about Neighborhood Church, and even where the name comes from, is just being about our neighbors. Not just the place where we live. Place is important, but really it's more about us being good neighbors to the people around us. We really care about our neighbors. And that's why we want to start a church that says you don't have to measure up. No matter where you're at, no matter who you are, no matter what you believe, there's a place for you here. And this is a community where you can belong no matter what you believe. And so we have this name, Neighborhood Church, to say we care about our neighbors. We want what's best for our neighbors. And in a sense, really to say, we'll go out of our way for what's best for our neighbors. And that's the idea that I want to kind of talk about this morning is this idea of what does it mean to be a neighbor? How did Jesus define the word neighbor when somebody asked him, hey, who is my neighbor? He kind of flipped the script. He changed a paradigm when that happened. And so that's what I want to talk about this morning. And so we're going to read from the Gospel of Luke. And I love the Gospel of Luke because Luke himself is sort of an outcast when it comes to Bible figures and people at the time of Jesus that we know about. To describe Luke, I have to tell you first about Paul, who is a guy who went around and told a lot of people about Jesus and started new churches. And Luke was just like his traveling buddy and his doctor, and he kind of tagged along with him. Nobody really knew Luke without knowing Paul. But Luke was a doctor, physician, and he did his own research on the claims that Jesus made, and the claims that people made about Jesus, to kind of figure out what's really true. What's going on with this Jesus guy? And so the Gospel of Luke is Luke's account of Jesus' life, kind of like his thesis after he did his research. He wrote this and about what he found to be true about Jesus. And one of the other things that I love about Luke is that in his writing, he really made it a point to talk about the times when Jesus interacted with and included people that most of society had written off. People that most of society had held at arm's length and said, you don't fit here. And Luke made it a point to say Jesus included those people. So we're going to be in Luke's gospel account of Jesus' life, chapter 10, verses 25 through 37 this morning. If you brought a Bible, I see some phones coming out. That's awesome. You can read along with me. If not, don't worry, it'll be on the screen. You can follow along as I read. So we'll start now at verse 25.
Do you have the right translation? I just want to know that.
It's NIV.
I'm kidding. What is your translation? That's fine. Sorry.
That's fine. And I knew the international version. Yeah, so starting at verse 25. And Jesus, this is important, and it'll come up a little bit later in the story, so I want to mention it now. Jesus is talking to a Jewish crowd of people here, a group of Jewish people, and Jesus himself was Jewish. So these are kind of his own people that he's talking to. And it says, on one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. So this is somebody who had studied the Jewish law, knew it backwards and forwards, and just, knew it all, knew everything there was to know about it. An expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What is written in the law? He replied, how do you read it? So Jesus is kind of saying, you're the expert. I'm not going to fall into your trap. You're trying to test me. What do you think it says? And so he answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And remember, this was an expert in the law trying to test Jesus, right? So he probably knew the answer to this question too, right? And I think Jesus is kind of sensing this is a continuation of the test. This is not a new question. And I think what this Jewish expert had in mind was Leviticus 19:18. So Leviticus is part of the Jewish law in what we call today, we Christians call the Old Testament. And I think this is kind of an obscure verse, but this guy's an expert in the law. He knew it. He probably had it memorized. And what it says in Leviticus 19:18 about who is your neighbor, it says this: "Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but love your neighbor as yourself." So in this verse, what we kind of see is that this word neighbor really refers to like your people. In this context, it's kind of like your ethnicity. Today, we might think of it more as like the people who agree with us, the people that we like, the people in our political party. Whatever the category might be, that's your neighbor according to this. And the thing is, I think Jesus is seeing like this is still the test. And if it's still a continuation of the test, Jesus is about to fail the test so out there, so spectacularly, that there's no way he did it by accident. Like the things that he says to answer this question, who is my neighbor? There's no way that he was mistaken here. He knew exactly what he's saying, and he's about to flip the paradigm. So in reply, Jesus said, he tells a story like he so often does. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, where he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now, Jerusalem to Jericho was about a 15-mile walk. So for us, it would be like walking from here to Tooele, over the mountains, over the mine, probably just as rocky and tough terrain, except Jerusalem to Jericho was all downhill. But that's the distance, and it was rocky, kind of abandoned, so it's not really out of the question that someone would be robbed on this road. And it's important to know that the group of people Jesus was talking to, Jews, would go take this road from Jerusalem to Jericho so that they could cut north. It was northeast to go to Jericho, and then they could cut north without having to go into a certain land that we'll talk about in a minute. So he goes on, Jesus, and he says, a priest happened to be going down the same road. And when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed on the other side. So this is a Jewish group thinking, wait, these guys are like the best of us. They're the best of the best. They're like our heroes. They're the most highly respected people in our society. The priest is a guy who like leads everything that happens at the temple. He leads the rituals, the ceremonies, the sacrifices. He makes sure that everything is done right so that the people can kind of be right with God at this time, the Jewish people. And he doesn't stop to help this guy. And the group must have been thinking, well, if he's not the hero, then who is? And then a Levite comes on the scene and they're like, okay, here's our hero. Here's the guy who's going to make this right. But the Levite goes on the other side too. The Levite was a temple worker. He was kind of like the priest's assistant. So he would help out in the temple. And so, again, it's a guy that they would be expecting to help out in this situation. But he crosses to the other side of the road and can't be bothered, and he moves on. These are the two heroes kind of in Jewish culture. And so the crowd must have been wondering, okay, if they're not the heroes, then who is? If they're not going to help this person in need, then who will? And Jesus continues, he says, but a Samaritan. This is the territory that Jews would take the road to Jerusalem, to Jericho, to avoid Samaria when they wanted to go north. They would cut east and then go north so that they didn't have to go through this land. So this crowd must be thinking, okay, we had a priest, we had a Levite, they're not the heroes. We have a third guy on the scene. Who's the fourth guy? Because that's going to be the hero of the story. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper. A denarius was a day's wage for a worker. So here in South Jordan, the average salary is, depending where you look, between like $52,000 to $60,000 a year. So you take $50,000. Two days' wage of a worker is $400. He gives $400 to the innkeeper, says, look after him, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expenses you may have. Which one of us would do that? For a person we don't know. Here's $400, and I'll pay the rest, however much it is, when I get back. And the Samaritan becomes the hero of the story. But these people are thinking, wait, the priests and Levi, they couldn't be bothered. Their day couldn't be interrupted. They couldn't interrupt their life or their job. And they were probably trying to justify it. But there was this idea of ritual or ceremonial cleanness or uncleanness. And as part of the Jewish law, if you were to touch a dead body, you would be ceremonially unclean and you couldn't participate in the temple for a time until you were cleansed. Well, the priest and the Levite needed to be involved in things at the temple. And so they were probably thinking, well, this guy's not dead, but he's half dead. There's at least a risk here. But what Jesus is saying is, he's asking the question, was it more important for you to be able to go and lead your worship services in the temple? Or was it more important for you to take care of this person in need? And then the Samaritan comes on. A Samaritan who is on this road, quite literally in territory where he's absolutely hated. And he kind of puts it all on the line and risks it all for a person who hates him, who looks down on him. Jews and Samaritans hated each other because when the kingdom of Israel fell, the northern part, which became Samaria later, it fell first. It was conquered first, and the conquering people came in, and as part of the Jewish people's law, it said that you should not marry foreigners. And they did. And so the Jews from the southern part of the kingdom would call them half-breeds and dogs and things like that. And I don't know about you, but if someone called me that, I probably wouldn't take kindly to it. So they hated each other. There was this animosity. But the Samaritan, even though this person on the side of the road hates him, stops and helps him and sacrifices of himself, giving of the oil and the wine that he has. He puts the guy on his own donkey, takes him to an inn, like I said, $400, and I'll pay the rest when I get back. And so in all of this, Jesus is redefining who our neighbor is and what it means to be a neighbor. Remember, it's not your people anymore. Jesus is saying it's everybody. And he even asks this expert the question. He's not letting him kind of get away with the question. He says, which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The way the expert replies cracks me up. I think it's so funny to see like the culture of the time come through here. I kind of imagine Jesus saying, which of these 3 do you think was the man's neighbor? And the expert in the law says the Samaritan.
Yeah.
The expert in the guy who showed mercy. Like he can't say the word Samaritan because he hates him so much.
Yeah.
He says, well, it's the one who showed mercy. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. So what do you think about that? We are supposed to love not just the people who look like us, not just the people who live near us in our land, in our territory, not just our people, our ethnicity. And by the way, it really wasn't an ethnic thing. I should say this, why Jews hated Samaritans. It was a disobedience thing. Like, you've dishonored our God by doing this. But we're supposed to love not just the people who look like us, not just the people who believe the same as us, not just the people who have the same political views as us, not just the same people who view the world the way we do, but the people who hate us, the people who disagree, the people who don't like us, the people who we don't really get along with either. Our enemies even are the ones we're called to love. This is the paradigm shift of who Jesus calls our neighbor. And these commands that kind of started this whole interaction, these are really tough commands, right? It's not to love God with all you are and all you have, and to love your neighbor as yourself are kind of different from, maybe you've heard this, one of the 10 Commandments, do not steal. right? Like, it's kind of black and white. Like, did you steal or did you not steal? But when we talk about loving someone, it's a little more complicated, isn't it? It's a little more complicated. It's less black and white. It's a lot more about your entire life, not just did you or did you not. It's what character are you having? How are you living your life? Not one of us, and not one of the people listening here can honestly say, when it comes to the command to love God and to love our neighbors as ourselves, that we have perfectly fulfilled it. Every one of us has fallen short because we get self-centered, we get self-focused. We think, you know what, God, I know what you say in this situation, but I kind of want to do my own thing because it's a lot easier. We ever done that, right? And so there's something we learn from each one of the people in Jesus' story about this idea of how we have all fallen short of this command to love God and to love our neighbors. From the priest and the Levite, here's what I think we learn: that no one is good enough. No one is good enough to meet the standard of perfection. Because here are two guys who were trying to, and they were saying, you know, I can't touch that half-dead person because it's a risk. I don't know if I can do my job later. And Jesus is saying, no, it was about helping that person. Even your worship services in my honor can wait, because it's about helping this person. They fell short. No one is good enough. These are the heroes of society. Nobody is good enough. And from the Samaritan, the person who's hated, who's looked down on, who still comes and helps this person, we learn that no one is left out. Jesus said this person is looked down on. He is the enemy in this story. He is the enemy of the people listening, but he's not left out. He's welcome. He's neighbor. And from the man who's just left for dead, doesn't really play a major role in this story, does he? But what we can learn is that no one is too far from God. No one is too much of a mess. No one has fallen too far short for God to come in and rescue them.
Is it okay to ask a question?
Absolutely. Go for it.
I know Jesus spoke in parables. Was speaking in parables kind of normal for that day, or was that just a Jesus thing?
It's a little bit of both.
Okay.
It's a little bit of both.
So it wasn't weird that he spoke in parables all the time?
I wouldn't say it was weird. It definitely upset some people because they wanted it to shoot a little straighter.
Yeah.
But Jesus talks about with his disciples his purpose for parables.
Yeah.
And
But
he
you
says,
think a lot of people
the ones
may-
you hear, let them hear.
Yeah.
It's a good question.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's that?
Hey, we're in the living room. We can do Q&A. I love it.
Okay. Okay.
I love it. But yeah, no one is too far from God.
Come on.
No one has to be left out. No one has to say, I have to fix myself and get right before I can come to God. And so I want to ask a couple of questions, 3 questions to you guys. And basically it's, who do you identify with in this story that Jesus tells? Do you identify with the priest and the Levite? And I'll say that there's kind of 3 groups of people here. It's perfectly normal if you identify with more than one. I probably identify with all 3, at least at different times. But do you identify with the priest and Levite? Do you identify with this idea that if I just keep busy for God, if I just keep checking the boxes, if I just keep striving, that eventually I will earn my place of right standing before Him? And if that's you this morning, then I just want to ask, how good is good enough? And that's me. That's me asking that question. How good is good enough? Because the standard is perfection. And what happens when you're checking your boxes and you're checking your boxes of what you're supposed to do and you miss one? Or what happens when you check one of the wrong ones? You do something you weren't supposed to do. This standard is perfection, and no one is good enough. But Jesus lived a perfect life. And so he says, you can't measure up. You can't meet the standard on your own, but I have already done it. I've done it for you. I lived a perfect life. And he's inviting you this morning to say, you don't have to purify yourself. You don't have to fix yourself. You don't have to make yourself measure up or keep striving to measure up. I live the perfect righteous life, and you get to wear my righteousness instead of your own, so that God sees you through the lens of my righteousness and not your own. He died so that you can be made pure and clean before God, and the work is already finished. There are no more boxes to check. Isn't that good news? It's free. Or maybe you identify more with the Samaritan this morning, and you feel like the outcast, the kind of the other, the one who's been cast out or cast aside, the one who just feels like you're looked down on and you just don't belong. Maybe you're kind of in that boat of like, I know there's a standard in Utah, but I just give up trying to meet it because I just don't. But you're still feeling like people look at you through that lens. I want to remind you that Jesus made your character the hero in this story. And he did that to show that no one is left out. Jesus himself was outcast from his own people. Remember I said they didn't really like some of the things he had to say. They didn't like the way he described himself. He was cast out, he was ridiculed, he was called names, and he was put on a cross. The most humiliating, torturous, painful way to die. Jesus took that on himself in order to say that no one has to be left out. And so because of that, it doesn't matter what you've done, it doesn't matter where you've been, it doesn't matter who you've been with, what you've said, what you've messed up, the mess that you've made. It doesn't matter. What matters is that Jesus says that you belong. So maybe for you this morning, it's not the priest or the Levite, it's not the Samaritan. Maybe you're the guy dying in the ditch. I've been there. I've been there.
Yep.
You know, maybe you've made a mess and you're feeling stuck and like I just can't pull myself out of this ditch on my own. I've got nothing left. Maybe you're just ready to kind of give up on it this morning, give up on everything, give up on God. But I want to remind you again that no one is too far from God. No one is too messy for God to come in and restore you. No one, it's not too late.
Amen.
It's not too late for anyone.
Come on.
And if this is you this morning, if you feel like the guy who's dead and dying in this story, I just want to say you're in the right place. Because I want to say that you are not a burden. You are not less than anybody. Jesus came to the earth, God in the flesh, to enter our mess with us so that he could deliver us from it. Because we couldn't save ourselves. So he said, I'm going to take care of this for you. He's in your mess with you, and he will not abandon you. You know, there have been times in every one of our lives where we have acted as God's enemies. Right? Where we haven't loved him with all we are and everything that we have. And where we haven't loved our neighbors as ourselves. We've done things that have rejected and rebelled against God. But here in this story, Jesus says even the enemy is a neighbor. And he proved it. Because he went to the cross and he took our sin, the things that we did to reject him, to separate ourselves from him, to go our own way. He took those things on himself. And he paid the price for us in order to give us the free gift of eternal life. That's what's most important. It's not about measure up. It's not about you have to have it all together. It's not about fix yourself. Jesus just says, believe in me. I've taken care of the rest. Believe that what I have done is enough to make you fully right, fully loved, and fully known by God. So what I'd like to do is would you bow your heads and close your eyes. And we're gonna kind of do, it's like a wedding vows type thing, okay? I'm gonna say a prayer, and I'll take it in kind of chunks. And I would love for you guys just to repeat it after me. If you have said this prayer 100 times in your life, that's wonderful. I still want you to say it out loud. Because maybe there's somebody next to you who hasn't said a prayer like this before and just needs a little bit of courage, just a little bit of encouragement to be able to say it, maybe for even the first time this morning. So would you close your eyes, bow your heads, I'll do it to you, and just repeat this prayer after me. And I want to say to you, there's nothing magical, there's nothing special, there's no magic formula, but I think this prayer is important. So pray this after me. God, I don't deserve your love. But you love me anyway. You don't leave anyone out of your love.
Don't leave anyone out of your love.
And you won't leave me out.
And you won't leave me out.
I'm broken and I need you.
I'm broken and I need you.
Jesus, come into my life.
Jesus, come into my life.
Change my heart with your